anybody else at the time. They would have seen their wealth as untouchable by both government and taxes. They were living tax-free. They were struggling to define themselves in that class as wealthy, so they're going to collect art. They're going to build and compete with each other for the who's got the biggest house kind of thing. You're going to start to see the construction, as you guys are thinking about this, the construction of the Rhode Island cottages. These were the cottages of New York's wealthy, where they summered, and they called them cottages, but these are houses of 10,000 to 15,000 square feet with 64 rooms, right, decorated with European Renaissance kinds of furnishings. The best example we have on the West Coast is somebody like Hearst. If you're familiar with Hearst Castle, right, mm-hmm. That's what they were developing for themselves, and they would summer in the northern parts of New England and then come into New York during the winter and translate back and forth. They had disdain for the lower classes. They wouldn't have had any contact with the lower classes except for the servants working in their homes. They would probably treated them, I can't speak generally, but individually they tended to treat their servants pretty poorly. And anybody in the lower classes pretty poorly. There was some disdain.
So, a high-class family in New York. Well, I think we would definitely see issues of gender very differently, right? And like the roles within the family. So certainly a wife would have been in an upper class family, not so much in a position of having to do the actual housework herself. In that position of privilege, you would definitely have help. In fact, it was common even in like middle class households in the late 19th century, early 20th century to have help, right? And so this is a time in the early 20th century when things are changing a lot in terms of like the technology of running a home. Just thinking about inventions like the vacuum cleaner, you know, like you don't think about that, like we take it for granted today. You know, a woman managing a household of servants and help and everything would also sort of be sort of enhance her status by investing in these new technologies and like a vacuum cleaner, a washing machine, or what have you. And then she would sort of be the talk amongst her neighbors, her friends, of you know, having these sorts of things. So that's how you sort of display your wealth. And mm-hmm. This is you're probably maybe talking a little bit about how this is the time of like a consumer revolution. So yeah. This is when, you know, women are going to department stores for the first time, and you know, able to purchase these items just kind of outright. And again, it's a way of sort of displaying that conspicuous consumption, right? Like, look what I'm able to afford. And I focus on women a lot because I think they're just so important in this time. Like the sort of new woman is, you know, becoming more independent, becoming more educated, and particularly for somebody of a higher status, it would be expected that she would be well educated, probably even at this point starting to have the expectation of having like some college education or some education beyond secondary, although like still her main role would be to make a good match, to get married, and to have children. The man of the house, somebody who was very wealthy, would doctor, lawyer, businessman, industrialist, you know, there was still sort of, and this goes back to like the early 19th century, early Victorian times even, still sort of this expectation of separate spheres, meaning that the man would sort of go out into the chaos of like the workaday world, and have to maybe make some risky investments and engage in some like maybe not so moral behavior in the business world. So coming home, the home was supposed to be like the haven, right? And again, the wife is sort of responsible for managing that, making sure it's the haven that it's supposed to be when he comes home. And the other thing that I guess that pops into my head as I'm thinking about it is that in an aristocratic family there were very strong strictures on like behavior and just like interactions, both between like children and husbands and wives, and there's a sense of I guess guardedness about behavior. You don't talk openly about emotions. You don't children, you don't have this sort of like just very open like children running around like playing with toys and being very loud sort of thing. Like children are expected to know their place and their order in the household, right? And everybody understands that, and then that's very important because you're constantly like you're part of society, right? You're going to these balls, you're going constantly visiting at other homes, and so like maintaining that presence, that identity in the community as a proper family and proper society is very, very important. And so that didn't mean that it really played out that way. I mean, there were still like the messy realities of families, right, and fights and cheating and affairs and everything, and but you had to really bottle that up as much as possible.
They would have worn a combination of fine store-bought clothes purchased from the new department stores, the posh department stores that had emerged in those years. This was the era of the rise of the department store, which were really posh, and they would have worn tailored clothes made to order by bespoke tailors. So a combination of both. They would have been the only Americans with the most up-to-date conveniences. So they would have probably been the only ones that had, or one of the few that had electric lights in their house. They would have had ice boxes, which very few people had, to buy fresh and conserve fresh food. They would have had heat. I mean, other people would have had heat too, but they would have had heating systems that heated every room rather than a central room. They would have lived in big houses. And they would have had very little contact with people other than themselves. So their social lives would have revolved around other people like themselves, equally rich. Both their daughters and sons would have been educated.
And the kids probably would have gone off to boarding school when they reached a mature enough age, which would have been in their late elementary school years. The girl would have stayed home, probably gone to finishing school. Any boy children would have been tutored out and then sent to college. And he matriculated to college much earlier than we do today. So
the daughters really to no end, because there were few careers for women then who were educated, and by educated I mean increasingly sent to college. So these were really the first Americans who went to college in substantial numbers. No one else did. The social circles were very gendered, and so there was interaction between men and women, but there was a lot of socializing that was what we call homosocial, all women, all men. And so men would have, the world of men would have revolved around their work. It would have revolved around social activities like at country clubs. I mean, these were the first Americans to establish and join posh country clubs, posh urban clubs. So there would have been socializing, work-related socializing and networking, extending from where they were employed and with whom they worked, and that's so men really, their world revolved around whatever company they worked for or owned, lawyers, bankers, investment advisors, that kind of stuff.
Food-wise, they're eating the best. Their table would have been set with the best food available to them, and because we're coming into a period of industrialization, we're starting to see what we would recognize as modern foodstuffs becoming available through canning and other things like that, so they could get French and other European delicacies sent to them Most of them had personal kitchen staffs that were developing menus for them, but they would have eaten incredibly well. Banquet style for most meals, with 4 or 5 courses, wine at every course, and yeah, they had no worries. They were living in a time where there was nothing regulating their wealth or their behaviors. So, top of the world.